Why no one owns anything anymore? You don't own your music. You don't own your movies. You don't own your software. You don't even fully own your car anymore. And if current trends continue, you may never fully own your home either. That sounds exaggerated, almost conspiratorial. But it's not. It's structural. Because over the last decade, something fundamental has shifted in how the economy works, and most people didn't notice it happening in real time. We didn't just change what we buy, we changed what it means to own something. And slowly, almost invisibly, ownership itself has been replaced. Not with nothing, but with something far more profitable: access. Temporary, conditional, revocable access, packaged as convenience, sold as flexibility, but designed for one thing above all else: control. There used to be a very simple exchange at the core of capitalism. You paid money once, and in return, you owned something. A CD, a DVD, a piece of software, a car, a house. Ownership meant permanence. It meant that no one could take it away from you. You could use it whenever you wanted. You could sell it. You could keep it for life. It was yours. That concept, simple as it sounds, created independence. Because once you owned something, your relationship with the seller ended. They got paid. You got control. The transaction was finished. Now compare that to today. Today, the transaction never ends. You don't buy music, you stream it. You don't buy movies, you subscribe to them. You don't buy software, you lease it indefinitely. And even the things you physically possess are no longer fully under your control. Your phone is tied to an ecosystem. Your files are locked into platforms. Your purchases exist inside accounts that can be restricted, suspended, or changed. Ownership hasn't just been reduced. It's been refined. And that didn't happen by accident. Because from a business perspective, ownership is inefficient. If a company sells you something once, their revenue from you stops. They have to find a new customer. But if they can charge you continuously, you become a predictable stream of income, month after month, year after year. Instead of a transaction, you become a subscription. And that changes everything. Because subscriptions aren't just a pricing model, they're a power structure. At first, subscriptions felt like a win for consumers. Lower upfront costs, more flexibility, constant updates. It seemed like a fair trade, but what most people didn't realize is that subscriptions don't just change how you pay. They change what you actually have. When you subscribe, you don't own anything. You're renting access. And access is fundamentally different from ownership. Access can be modified. Access can be restricted. Access can be taken away entirely, at any time. And because you don't own the underlying asset, you have no leverage. If a platform raises prices, you either pay or you lose access. If they remove content, it's gone. If they change the terms, you adapt. That's the trade-off. Convenience in exchange for control. And over time, that trade-off compounds. Because once subscriptions become normalized, companies begin to optimize around them. They start designing products not to be owned, but to be paid for continuously. That's when the system evolves into something more sophisticated, something more difficult to escape. Lock in. Think about how your digital life is structured. Your photos are stored in one place, your documents in another. Your messages, apps, subscriptions, all interconnected. Each platform knows exactly what it's doing. Because the goal isn't just to attract you, it's to keep you. This is where switching costs come into play. Switching costs are the friction you experience when trying to leave a system. Time, effort, data migration, learning new tools. Individually, these things seem small, but combined, they become a barrier. And that barrier keeps you exactly where you are. Now combine that with subscriptions. You're not just paying monthly. You're paying monthly inside a system that's designed to make leaving difficult. That's not convenience anymore. That's dependency. And over time, something subtle happens. Your mindset shifts. You stop thinking in terms of ownership. You stop asking, do I own this? And you start asking, do I still have access to this? That shift is psychological, but it has real consequences. Because ownership creates security. Access creates uncertainty. Ownership is permanent. Access is conditional. And once access becomes the default, companies gain something they've never had before: ongoing control over the customer relationship. But the real turning point, the moment this trend becomes impossible to ignore, is when it moves beyond digital products. Because now, it's happening to physical things. Take cars. For most of modern history, buying a car meant owning it. Every feature, every capability. Once you paid, it was yours. But that model is starting to break. Today, cars are increasingly software-driven. And that software controls functionality, which means manufacturers can decide what features you can use and when. Heated seats, performance upgrades, advanced driving features. Some of these are no longer included in the purchase. They're sold separately, as subscriptions. Think about that. You physically own the car. The hardware is already installed, but you still have to pay to unlock it. That's not ownership. That's controlled access. And it sets a precedent. Because once consumers accept that model in one category, it spreads. Appliances can be updated remotely. Devices can be locked or restricted. Features can be turned on and off at will. Products are no longer static. They're dynamic. And that allows companies to monetize them continuously. This is what's known as product as a service. Instead of selling a finished product, companies sell an ongoing experience. One that can be modified, expanded, or restricted over time. From a business standpoint, this is incredibly powerful, because it turns every product into a long-term revenue generator, not just at the point of sale, but throughout its entire life cycle. And once that model becomes standard, something else happens. The concept of ownership starts to fragment. You might own the physical object, but not the functionality. You might possess the product, but not control how it works. Ownership becomes partial, layered, conditional, and that fundamentally changes the relationship between people and the things they buy. But the most significant shift of all isn't happening in software, or cars, or devices. It's happening in housing. Because housing has always been the foundation of wealth. For decades, the formula was simple: buy a home, pay it off, build equity. Ownership created stability. It created generational wealth. It created independence. But that model is under pressure. Institutional investors have entered the housing market at scale, buying single-family homes, not to sell, but to rent. Because housing, like everything else, can be turned into a recurring revenue stream. If you control enough properties, you control access to living space. And if people are renting instead of owning, they're not building equity. They're making payments. Every month. Indefinitely. That starts to look a lot like a subscription. And if that trend continues, the implications are enormous. Because housing isn't just another product. It's a necessity. Which means the shift from ownership to access becomes even more significant. Because it affects not just what people buy, but how they live. Now step back and look at the bigger picture. Across industries, across products, across entire sectors, the same pattern is repeating. Ownership is being replaced with access. Assets are being replaced with services. Transactions are being replaced with ongoing payments. And control is being centralized. Not through force, but through design. Because the system doesn't need to take ownership away from you directly. It just needs to make access more appealing, more convenient, more normalized, until ownership feels unnecessary, or even outdated. And once that happens, the shift is complete. We move from an ownership economy to an access economy, where fewer people own assets and more people pay to use them continuously. That has deep implications. Because ownership gives you leverage. It gives you something that exists independently of any system, something that can't be easily taken away. Access, on the other hand, ties you to systems, platforms, providers, policies, And when your access depends on someone else's infrastructure, your autonomy decreases, even if it doesn't feel like it. Because the system is designed to feel seamless, frictionless, invisible. That's why this shift is so effective. Because it doesn't feel like a loss. It feels like progress. It feels like innovation. It feels like convenience. But underneath that surface, the balance of power is changing. From individuals to institutions, from ownership to control. And it's happening gradually enough that most people never stop to question it. But maybe they should. Because ownership wasn't just about having things. It was about independence. It was about permanence. It was about building something that lasted beyond the next payment cycle. And now, more and more of life is being structured around temporary access, around continuous payments, around systems that you don't control. So the question isn't just, why does it feel like no one owns anything anymore? It's, what happens when ownership becomes the exception instead of the rule? What happens when everything you rely on exists at the discretion of someone else? And maybe the most important question of all, did we give up ownership willingly? Because access was easier, without fully understanding what we were giving up in return? Because once ownership is gone,